At 1 a.m. on March 29, 1988, in Kansas City, Missouri, Chris Bryson was lured into the home of 39-year-old store owner Robert Berdella. He was knocked out with an iron bar and tied to Berdella's bed, where he was subjected to extreme abuse and torture, which included sexual assault, electrocution, and injection with hypodermic needles. After 3 days, Bryson convinced Berdella to tie his hands in front of him instead of above his head. While he was at work, Bryson managed to burn through his restraints with a book of matches that was accidentally left in the room. Afterwards, wearing only a dog collar, he jumped from a second-story window, breaking his foot, but he managed to flag down a police officer. Upon obtaining a search warrant, police found evidence that suggested that Christopher wasn't the only victim of Robert Berdella. Welcome to History's Biggest Villains. Robert Berdella was born on January 31, 1949 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, the first of two sons born to Robert Berdella Sr. and Marie Louise Berdella. Robert's family were devout Catholics. The family regularly attended Mass, and both sons regularly attended religious education courses. Berdella was an intelligent child, but a loner who rarely played outside. He had a speech impediment and wore thick glasses from the age of 5, because he was severely nearsighted. Berdella was largely unathletic, while his younger brother Daniel was always into sports. Berdella's father valued sports and viewed Robert's lack of interest in sports as a sign of failure, often comparing him unfavorably with his younger brother. When Berdella reached puberty, he discovered that he was gay. Initially, he kept this fact a closely guarded secret, and he wasn't open about his sexuality for several years. In 1965, Berdella saw the film version of John Fowles' The Collector. The plot of the film revolves around a disturbed man who stalks and abducts a young woman who he finds attractive, holding her captive in his windowless stone basement, and viewing her as little more than an attractive specimen. After several weeks, the woman dies of a contracted illness despite her captor's efforts to keep her alive. Berdella later stated that this movie had formed a lasting impression on him. Shortly after his father's death, his mother remarried, and he viewed it as a form of betrayal against his father. As a result, he became increasingly withdrawn and further immersed himself in solitary activities such as painting, collecting coins and stamps, and writing to foreign pen pals. He would later claim that his hobby of writing to pen pals in countries such as Vietnam and Burma, and there sending him stamps and photographs of mythical and historical icons, ancient cultures, and architecture would lead to his interest in primitive art, photographs, and antiques. In 1965, he began collecting these artifacts, and this practice would inspire him to open his own business in 1982. Shortly after graduation, Berdella relocated to Kansas City, enrolling in the Kansas City Art Institute, with aspirations of becoming a college professor. While he was a good student, he was an avid drug and alcohol user. He also engaged in acts of animal torture on at least 2 occasions. During one of these instances, he decapitated a duck. Then he experimented with sedatives and tranquilizers on a dog. At 19, Berdella was arrested for attempting to sell meth to an undercover officer. He was released after posting a $3,000 bond. He would later plead guilty to the offense and was given a 5-year suspended sentence. 1 month after this first arrest, Berdella and 2 other students were arrested for possession of marijuana and LSD in Johnson County. He couldn't post bond, and he spent 5 days in jail. The charges against him and one of the other students would be dropped due to a lack of evidence. In 1969, Berdella dropped out of college after receiving harsh criticism from the administrators for killing and cooking a duck for the sake of art. He chose to remain in Kansas City, and in September of that year, he moved into an address within the Hyde Park District, 4315 Charlotte Street. By this stage, Berdella had been more open with his sexuality, and he began spending much of his free time with male prostitutes, drug addicts, petty criminals, and runaways. Berdella would typically befriend these individuals, then try to help free them from their drug addictions and criminal lifestyles, although he was adamant that throughout much of the 70s, he had no physical contact with any of them. By the early 1980s, many of his older acquaintances had stopped hanging out with him. Berdella increasingly relied on these young men as a source of companionship and friendship. He would later claim to have become more and more frustrated that many of these men were ignorant of his efforts to help steer them away from self-destructive behaviors. Despite these claims, Berdella would often have sexual relations with the men he befriended and would establish a degree of control over them. Shortly before Berdella moved into a Charlotte Street address, he began working as a short order cook in various restaurants around Kansas City as a way to help pay lawyer fees and fines from his previous drug arrests. As a means of earning additional money, he also sold items of art and antiques he had collected from contacts he had established in Africa, Asia, South America, and other countries. He initially operated this side business from his home. Berdella's cooking career and the antiques business flourished, and by the mid-70s, he began working as a senior cook at several renowned restaurants in the area. He joined a local chefs association and helped establish a training program for aspiring chefs at a local community college. At the same time, he gave more attention to his own business. By 1981, he had established several contractual agreements with both national and international contacts for his antiques business. He then decided to devote all of his time to his antiques business. By 1982, Berdella began renting his own booth at the Westport Flea Market. This store was named Bob's Bazaar Bazaar and primarily sold and traded primitive art, jewelry, and antiques. Although it was somewhat lucrative, the income from this business wasn't enough to maintain his expenses. As a result, Berdella would steal items to sell at his booth. He would also take lodgers at his home as a means of getting additional money. At the flea market, Berdella became friends with a fellow merchant named Paul Howe, who operated a booth next to his. Soon, Berdella became acquainted with Paul Howe's younger son, Jerry. Initially, Jerry and his friends taunted Berdella over his overt homosexuality, although according to Berdella, Jerry Howe later confided in him that he and his friends occasionally earned money as male prostitutes. On July 5th, 1984, Berdella promised to drive Jerry to attend the dancing contest in Merriam. He gave Howe a mix of alcohol, diazepam, and asapromazine, both in his car and at his house, until he became unconscious. He then injected him with a heavy tranquilizer before binding him to his bed. Howe was restrained to Berdella's bed for 28 hours. Throughout this time, Berdella repeatedly drugged, tortured, raped, and violated him with foreign objects, repeatedly ignoring his questions as to why he was being treated this way and his pleas to be freed. According to Berdella, Jerry either choked on his own vomit or the combination of the gag and the medicines were too strong for him to be able to catch a breath. Berdella would later state that he briefly tried to perform CPR on Howe after he died, before dragging his body to the basement. He suspended the body above a large cooking pot and made several incisions to his elbows and jugular vein, leaving the body suspended to allow the blood to drain from his corpse. The following day, he dismembered Howe's body using a chainsaw and boning knives, before wrapping the sections in newspaper and trash bags. The bags were later placed inside larger trash bags, which Berdella placed outside for a garbage crew to collect. He was later questioned by officers investigating Howe's disappearance, and he claimed to have driven him to Merriam as promised, where the two went their separate ways close to Howe's intended destination. Berdella further claimed he had not seen him since. As would be the case with all Berdella's murders, he kept a detailed journal in which he documented each act of sexual and physical torture inflicted upon his victims. He would remain adamant to investigators that this was not for his enjoyment, but for what he termed his physical and mental satisfaction. I mean, that's basically the same thing, but okay. On April 10th, 1985, a former lodger, 20-year-old Robert Sheldon, arrived at Berdella's doorstep, asking if he could stay at his house for a short period of time. According to Berdella, although Sheldon paid his rent, he considered him to be a nuisance. On April 12th, he drugged and held him captive after he returned from work to find Sheldon drunk. Berdella was adamant that he had no malice towards Sheldon, but saw him as a vessel upon whom he could express some of the anger and frustration that I had towards other people. Sheldon was drugged with sedatives, held captive, and tortured in the second-floor bedroom for 3 days. This included the swabbing of drain cleaner in his eye, the insertion of needles beneath his fingertips, the binding of his wrists with piano wire, and filling of his ears with caulking to reduce his hearing. 3 days after Berdella had kidnapped Sheldon, on April 15th, a handyman came to perform some scheduled work on the roof of his house. Berdella then suffocated Sheldon by placing a sack over his head, which he tightened with a piece of rope. He later dismembered Sheldon's body in the third-floor bathroom. The following June, Berdella found Mark Wallace, someone he vaguely knew after Wallace had helped him with yard work. He was hiding in his tool shed to seek shelter from a severe thunderstorm. As had been the case with Robert Sheldon, Berdella invited him inside his house and volunteered to inject him with chlorpromazine, with the explanation that this would calm down and relax him. Wallace accepted the offer, and 30 minutes later, he was sedated and woke up in restraints. Wallace was held in the second-floor bedroom, where he endured almost a day of captivity and torture. Berdella applied alligator clips to his nipples to give electric shocks to his body whenever Wallace began to slip into unconsciousness. According to Berdella, he experimented with hypodermic needles by inserting them into various muscles into Wallace's back. Mark Wallace died an hour later through a combination of the drugs, the gag, and the lack of oxygen. On September 26, 1985, Berdella answered a phone call from an acquaintance named James Ferris, who asked to stay at his house for a short time. Berdella agreed, arranging to meet at a bar that evening. Despite the brutality shown to his first 3 victims, Berdella claimed that Ferris was the first victim that he purposely tortured. Berdella brought Ferris home and drugged him with crushed tranquilizers and a meal, then tied him to his bed before torturing him for approximately 27 hours. The torture included the repeated delivery of 7,700 volt shocks to the shoulder and testicles for up to 5 minutes in each instance, and acupuncture via hypodermic needles to the neck and genitals. Ferris gradually became delirious, but Berdella continued his assaults until he noted in his log that Ferris was unable to sit up for more than 10 to 15 seconds. The very next entry read, "Very delayed breathing," and finally, Berdella noted that Ferris died with a slang term he had used in his career as a chef, 86, which Berdella later explained meant anything from throw it out to stop the project. Todd Stoops was a 23-year-old drug addict and occasional prostitute who, with his wife, had twice lived briefly at Berdella's house in 1984. After Stoops and his wife moved out of Berdella's home the second time, Berdella didn't see him again until a chance encounter at Kansas City's Liberty Memorial Park on June 17, 1986. Berdella invited him to his house with an offer of lunch, with an added incentive of sex for drug money, and this victim was held captive for 2 weeks before he died. He gradually increased Stoops' terror, attempting to make him a sex slave. Berdella used electric shocks through Stoops' closed eyes to try to blind him and injected drain cleaner into his throat to try to silence his screams. On June 27th, he ruptured Stoops' anal wall with his fist, causing it to bleed. Toward the end of Stoops' captivity, Berdella tried to give him ice cream and soup, although Stoops wasn't able to keep anything down. By the final day of his captivity, Stoops was so weak, Berdella stated, he had been unable to breathe in a sitting position. On July 1st, 1986, Stoops died, as a forensic pathologist later testified that the ruptured anal wall caused fatal septic shock. In the spring of 1987, Berdella became friends with 20-year-old Larry Wayne Pearson. This friendship began when Pearson entered his shop and explained to Berdella that as a child, he had held an interest in witchcraft and wizardry. Pearson temporarily lived with Berdella and performed chores around his home as a means of paying rent. According to Berdella, he didn't initially intend to capture Pearson, but began forming the plan to do so on June 23rd, 2 weeks after bailing him out of jail and noting Pearson displayed no interest in getting the job. On the afternoon of June 23rd, Berdella and Pearson watched the movie Creepshow 2 together before eating lunch. As the two men drove around Kansas, Pearson began jokingly referring to his practice of robbing gay men in Wichita. This disclosure was the final straw. That evening, Berdella plied Pearson with alcohol before injecting him with chlorpromazine and moving him to the basement, where he bound Pearson's hands above his head, then linked the rope to a brick column before injecting Pearson's larynx with drain cleaner. He then brought an electrical transformer to the basement. According to Berdella, Pearson was the most cooperative of his 6 murder victims. On the 5th day of his captivity, after enduring torture such as the repeated delivery of electric shocks and the breaking of several hand bones with an iron rod, Berdella deduced Pearson had earned his trust in his cooperation with the abuse. As some sort of reward, Pearson was moved to the 2nd floor, with Berdella telling Pearson that if he continued to cooperate, he wouldn't inflict as much pain as he had in the basement. Throughout the later part of his 6 weeks in captivity, Pearson trained himself to sleep motionless in order to not upset Berdella and risk further torture or being returned to the basement. After 6 weeks in captivity, Berdella forced Pearson to give him oral sex, and Pearson snapped, biting Berdella's penis before screaming that he couldn't tolerate his ongoing torture. In response, Berdella killed Pearson by first beating him with a tree limb, then suffocating him with a bag and ligature, before driving to the hospital to receive treatment for his wounds. Pearson's body was later dismembered in the basement and his head initially stored in a plastic bag inside Berdella's freezer before being buried in the backyard. At 1 a.m. on March 29, 1988, Berdella abducted his last victim, 22-year-old male prostitute Christopher Bryson, whom he lured to his house with the promise of payment for sex. At Berdella's home, Bryson was knocked unconscious with an iron bar then bound to Berdella's bed, where he was subjected to the same abuse and torture endured by the other victims. Although in Bryson's case, Berdella repeatedly swabbed his eyes with ammonia before telling him, "You did not choose to be here, but you are. For you to survive being here and for you to, make it, it could either be rough or it could be easy. If I grow to like you or to trust you, then I could do special things for you, such as buy you cigarettes, pick up a movie on the way home from work, and so forth. Don't try to fight me, or you'll just get more of what you had earlier. You see, what you got is nothing compared to what you can have." After several days, Berdella explained to Bryson that he had begun to trust him, and although he was willing to discuss some aspects of the abuse and torture he was receiving, there would be no negotiations regarding the sexual abuse. Berdella finished his discussion with a warning: "I've gotten this far with other people before, and they're dead now because of mistakes they made." By the third day of his capture, Bryson had earned enough trust from Berdella to persuade him to establish a routine of tying his hands in front of him after his sexual abuse rather than to the bed above his head, with the excuse that it was restricting the circulation to his arms. The following day, he managed to break 3 of his restraints by burning through them using a book of matches Berdella had accidentally left in the room when he left to go to work. Wearing nothing but a dog collar, Bryson escaped the house by jumping from a second-floor window, breaking a bone in his foot. He ran towards a meter reader who was walking down the other side of the street, shouting for him to call the police. The man led Bryson to the house he was approaching. The occupants called the police, who arrived minutes later. Questioned at the scene by 4 officers, Bryson initially claimed he was hitchhiking when he was abducted by Berdella, who had kidnapped, raped, and tortured him for 4 days before he escaped by jumping from a window on the second floor. Berdella had kept him bound to the bed on the second floor of the house for much of the time, repeatedly sodomizing him, drugging him, and injecting his throat with drain cleaner to diminish his ability to speak loudly. As Bryson spoke, the officers noted that in addition to the dog collar and broken foot, Bryson had red swollen eyes and visible scars and welts across his entire body. 2 officers were told to maintain a discreet surveillance of the property, while Bryson was driven to the hospital for treatment, accompanied by a 3rd officer, while the 4th officer radioed the Kansas City Police Department to request a formal search warrant of the property. During later questioning at the KCPD, Bryson told them that Berdella had shown him Polaroid images of men who appeared to be dead, and that he was told he would never leave the property, and that if he became a nuisance, he would either be subjected to greater torture or simply be killed. On the afternoon of Bryson's escape, Berdella was arrested on the charges of sexual assault of Christopher Bryson. He declined to allow officers in his home, and the search warrant earlier requested was drafted to search his property. The bedroom on the second floor had burnt ropes attached to the posts at the foot of the bed. Also in the room was an electrical transformer plugged into a wall with wires leading to the bed. A metal tray containing syringes, small bottles containing prescription drugs, swabs, and eye drops were close to the bed. Also found in the room were a long iron pipe, various lengths of rope, and leather belts. Investigators also noted that posts on the bed had been worn, suggesting that restraints had either been tied to them earlier and that the individuals had struggled to free themselves. Searching the house and grounds on 4315 Charlotte Street, investigators found a human skull inside a closet on the second floor of his property, and a partially decomposed human head in the backyard. The search also uncovered several human vertebrae scarred by both hacksaw and knife marks stowed in a hallway, and several human teeth stowed in 2 envelopes. Both a hacksaw and a meter saw were discovered in the basement of the property, and a chainsaw was also found to be soiled with bloodstains, flesh, and pubic hairs. Luminol tests revealed that the floor of Berdella's basement and 2 plastic trash barrels were extensively bloodstained. 334 Polaroid pictures and 34 snapshot prints of various men were also found in Berdella's house. These pictures showed Christopher Bryson and several other men, both in life and in death. Many of the images had been taken while the subjects were being tortured. The search also uncovered numerous restraints and sexual devices, porn magazines, hypodermic needles, and a book on narcotics. Officers also discovered a notebook containing detailed torture logs that Berdella had maintained for each victim lying on a chest of drawers. Several newspaper clippings from the Kansas City Star mentioning a missing young man named Jerry Howe, and a wallet and driver's license belonging to a missing person named James Ferris were discovered in a closet on the second floor of the property. Despite all the evidence against him, Berdella refused to talk and was sentenced to 6 months in jail for contempt of court. Initially, Berdella was being charged with 1 count of felonious restraint, 1 count of assault, and 7 counts of forcible sodomy. He was assigned a temporary public defender and held in protective custody in the Jackson County Jail with a $500,000 bond. In late April, the skull inside Berdella's closet was identified via dental x-rays as that of Robert Sheldon. 2 men separately phoned the police department to state that one of 7 unidentified young men depicted in a photographic array released to the media was a former high school acquaintance of theirs named Mark Wallace. When the detective contacted Wallace's sister, she stated that her brother had been missing since mid-1985. Investigators then discovered that photograph D in that same array was Larry Wayne Pearson. As Pearson had once been a ward of the court in Wichita, his dental records were discovered and compared with the skull found in Berdella's backyard. Berdella was formally charged with the murder by dismemberment of Larry Wayne Pearson in July, after the head discovered in his backyard was formally identified as Pearson's. On July 22, 1988, a grand jury formally indicted Berdella for the murder of Larry Wayne Pearson. The following month, he was arraigned and pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of Pearson. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Upon being sentenced, Berdella was transferred to the Missouri State Penitentiary to commence his life sentence. He would later be temporarily placed in protective custody at the Potosi Correctional Center due to safety concerns. A second guilty plea submitted before the Jackson County Court on August 24th earned Berdella a further life term without parole for 1 charge of forcible sodomy against Chris Bryson. 6 counts of sodomy and 1 charge of assault would be dropped as part of a plea bargain. He would also receive a further 7 years for 1 count of felonious restraint against Bryson on that same day. As part of his confession, he stated, "These were not people that I thought of once I had them bound and was using them. They became something other than people to me. I never thought it out to the level of, what if one of these bodies ever gets loose?" In 1992, Berdella contacted Reverend Roger Coleman, whom he had met when first incarcerated, voicing his distress that the staff at the penitentiary were withholding his heart medications. At 2 p.m. on October 8, 1992, Berdella complained to prison staff of severe heart pains and was taken from his cell to the prison infirmary. Medical staff determined that his heart was unstable and called an ambulance. Berdella was taken to a hospital in Columbia, Missouri, where he was pronounced dead from a heart attack at 3:55 p.m. He was 43 years old. And this case is just sickening. And plus, I've seen the pictures, the actual pictures. I'm not going to show the pictures because they're really graphic. I'm not going to show a picture of a dead guy on here. But just insane. Just the amount of stuff, the things, I don't even understand what compels people to do things like that. I don't even know. I guess it's not for me to understand. It's for me to just I don't know. This whole story is just insane. But thank you for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Also, don't forget to turn on the post notifications. Hope you have a great day. Be safe. Stay on the grind. I'm out. Peace.